Annyeonghaseyo, this is meowmurai. Let's continue our game of Despera Drops, running on Nintendo Switch 2.
世界の果てまで逃げてみせる。
準備ならできている。
これでいいのか?
Waving his hand, Carlos left the restaurant. As for the rest of us left behind, we let out heavy sighs.
大変なことになりましたね。
しかもさっきの目、嘘はついていなかった。あいつがビショップでもないとなると、ますます誰に監視されてんのかわからなくなるな。妙なメールを送ってくるやつに、欧州警察に、謎の襲撃者に、有名キャスター、さらにはフリーライターのお出ましか。やけにモテるじゃないか。
どうやら我々は厄介ごとに好かれるたちらしいな。
で、どうする？止まってるとこ探るなら僕行ってくるけど。
そうだな。念のため頼む。
はいよ。
Ram left the restaurant, quiet as a ghost. Only a few minutes later, he returned with news. It wasn't good news.
最悪。修理費方面の道路沿いの宿だった。僕らの行き先を読んでるとしか思えないよ。
案外この町で待ち伏せされていたのかもしれないな。
だとしたら、今回取引に応じたところで、また似たような目に遭うんじゃないか。なら、追えば危険だと思い知らせるか。
Glaring at the door with a sharp look in his eyes, Ash clenched his clasped hands. The dark expression on his face said that he meant to force Carlos to lose all motivation to chase us, one way or another. A chill ran down my spine.
頼むから傷害沙汰はやめてくれよ。余計厄介な報道されるじゃないか。
あの手の輩は暴力で屈するタイプじゃない。脅しは無駄だ。
でも取材って言ってもな。言う通りにして、本当に証拠品渡してくれるって保証もないよね。
そもそも取材って何をするんでしょう？
わからんが、先に質問事項を言わなかったあたり、あんた相手ならうまく聞きたい情報を引き出す自信があるんだろ
う。わざわざハミエルを避けたもんね。
ぜひ俺を指名してもらいたかったんだがな。
サリーだってちゃんと答えられたのに。
ま、この状況で一番人畜無害な上に、俺らが見聞きしたことを覚えてそうなのは、こいつしかいないからな。
それサリーが忘れっぽいってこと？
それよりも、僕が人畜無害ではないと思われたのが意外ですね。
いや、 お前の場合はそもそも普通の会話が成立しない可能性もあるからな。
安心してください。しっかりと愛の地球戦士としての活動を答えてみせます。
そういうところだよ。とにかくああいうジャーナリストは厄介だよ。大したことない質問で簡単に情報を持っていっちまう。多分質問自体は大したもんじゃないだろう。けど、嘘の苦手そうなあんたの顔が何よりの情報だ。つまり、話せば話すほど情報が漏れるってわけだな。
あまり話さないよう頑張ります。
素人に期待はしないが、なるべく喋らずに取引とやらを終えたいところだな。
むしろ何も喋る前に証拠品を手に入れられるか破壊できたらいいが。
破壊ですか。奪って川にでも放り投げますか？
周囲には川もない。うまく奪えたとしてこいつだ。体格差もあるし、すぐに取り返されるだろう。
お姉ちゃん、あんま足速くないもんね。
ごめんなさい。
They were right. That was our best option, but I wasn't quick-witted and agile like the others. I only saw this ending with Carlos catching me effortlessly.
なら、証拠品を出した瞬間、テラス席から狙撃をすればいい。
狙撃って？
Everyone's gaze gathered on Gib. It was clear we were all thinking about the same thing. Gib had punctured the police car tire when we'd left Milan.
まさかジブに撃たせるってこと？
ああ。ストローなんて撃てば粉々になって、証拠品として役に立たなくなるはずだ。
Dude, the straw is tiny.
さすがにそれは無理では。
だが前職では狙撃手だった。違うか？
よく知っているな。
名前を聞いてから図書館で当時の新聞を軽く調べただけだ。
Oh, he did?
でも狙撃するったって、証拠品は車のタイヤと違うんだぞ。そんな小さい的に当てられるわけないだろ。
Without a word, Gib took out his phone, pulled up the map of the town, and began surveying it. He checked the distance between the mountain restaurant and the Tell monument before letting out a small exhale.
ここからなら狙撃できるはずだ。
おいおい、マジかよ。
どうせ取材前に証拠品を持っているか確かめる必要がある。懐から出させさえすれば撃てるはずだ。
はあ、さすがですね。でも、もしミカに当たったら。
だが的を外さないと有名な狙撃手だったはずだ。そうだろ。
ああ。
Gibbs' voice was lower and somber. His dark gaze fell to the table.
「とにかく明日はなるべくカルロスとは言葉を交わさないようにしつつ証拠品を出させてくれ。頼んだぞ。」
はい。
What did his expression just now mean? I was just about to ask when a familiar voice sounded on the restaurant TV.
こんばんは。ユーロプレスの時間です。本日は先日囚人護送車から逃げ出した 指名手配犯についての続報をお届けいたします。
と、そろそろおいとました方が良さそうだな。
ああ、もう行くぞ。
Even if there weren't other guests around, now that we were being broadcast as fugitives again, it was a bad move to remain.
支払いは頼んだぜ、財布係。
Leaving me to pay for our meal, everyone else swiftly left the establishment. At least this is something only I can do. Being left behind made me antsy, especially when the TV was featuring us, but I was the least likely to be recognized. I chatted briefly with the shopkeeper, trying to sound as natural as possible during the payment process. Fortunately, he didn't seem to put two and two together. They didn't display our photos on the TV today, and that might have helped.
はい、ありがとうさん。
ごちそうさまでした。
By the time I walked outside, the news was already on to the next feature. Seeing Rebecca on the other side of the screen, I felt my pocket. The letter I wrote for her was still there. This thing was utterly meaningless. I was sure that even if I apologized to her, she would still have continued reporting in her indifferent manner. She was a newscaster who reported the truth, and I was a guilty criminal who'd ignored her proposal and stolen from her. What in the world was I thinking when I wrote it? Hamiel was right. This was nothing but hypocrisy. I scrunched the letter in my pocket and left the restaurant as fast as I could, as if someone was chasing me. Oh, she left that evidence behind. Well, that's not good.
もうサリークタクタだよ。
After leaving the restaurant, we walked across the marketplace and headed to our hotel.
もう少し快適で広い部屋が取れたらよかったんだがな。
One after another, everyone filed into the hotel we checked into earlier. But there was one exception. Gib halted just before the threshold.
ジブさん、行かないんですか？
取引場所を下見しておこうと思ってな。君は先に戻っていてくれ。
なら、一緒に行っていいですか？私も確認しておきたいので。
そうか。わかった。
He gave me a subdued nod. The two of us walked side by side through the streets of Altdorf. Tonight the sky was clear, without a single cloud in sight. The moon and street lamps cast their light on the cobble paving. Cobby, what was I thinking? Gib meticulously inspected the Tell monument. He checked the angle from the mountain for any possible traps Carlos had planted, and a few other things. After his inspection was more or less done, he sat down on the steps in front of the statue and let out a long, heavy sigh.
明日のことだが。
His speech faltered with doubt, his expression grave. It was evident he didn't think highly of our plan.
ごめんなさい、ジブさん。嫌な役回りを押し付けてしまって。
それは私のセリフだろう。本来であれば君のような一般人にこんな危険な役回りをさせるべきではないんだ。
Clasping his hands together, Gib shook his head.
君は怖くないのか？
私がですか？
私のような人間が銃で狙う現場に居合わせるんだ。普通恐ろしいと思うだろう。ハミエルも言っていたはずだ。汚職と現役警官による警官の殺害事件で有名なジブリエル・バルツァーだと。そんな犯罪者の射程距離に入るんだ。ただ事件に巻き込まれただけの君が。
His clasped hands were shaking. You couldn't fake that kind of concern, that anxiety. He believed that I'd been falsely accused and that I'd only been dragged into this mess. I couldn't describe how happy I was. I wanted to reassure him, and so I gingerly placed my hand on top of his.
私なら大丈夫です。
何を根拠にそんなことが言えるんだ。君は想像できていないかもしれないが、一歩間違えば大怪我をするんだぞ。長弾するかもしれない。それどころか間違って長弾するかもしれない。それどころか間違って君を撃ってしまうかもしれないんだ。
He wasn't like the usual calm and collected Gib at all. His voice was raised and harsh.
私は君に怪我をさせたくない。私にそんなことを言う資格はないだろうが、それでも恐ろしいんだ。もしこの手が誤って君を撃ってしまったらと。
Gib whispered through clenched teeth. His eyes darted back and forth, following his conflicting thoughts. A sniper renowned for never missing his mark was now horrified of messing up what he did best. He didn't want to harm anyone from the bottom of his heart. We trust Gib. I think so.
ジブさんを信じてますから。大丈夫です。
なぜだ。
Gib's eyes widened with astonishment. I didn't know whether he was a corrupt officer who'd murdered his coworker in cold blood, like Hamiel said. Since it'd been reported on TV news, he had to be involved in the incident in some way. But I can say the same about me.
ジブさんは私のことを事件に巻き込まれただけの一般人だと信じてくれました。報道されて
だが君と私とでは事情が。
同じですよ。真実は自分の中にしかないという意味では、私たちは同じだと思います。
Furthermore, a man who was so considerate to someone like me seemed like the furthest thing from a cold-hearted, bloodthirsty murderer of an officer.
だから、ジブさんを信じます。それは、私が自分を信じるということでもありますから。
はあ、そうか。
Ooh, I got two feathers. One was a dark feather, though. Gib dragged out a long sigh, and the tension ebbed away from his shoulders. He fixed his gaze on me with an expression of both bafflement and resignation.
できることならば、君たちを守るためだけに、この銃を使えればよかったのだが。
明日の作戦は、私たちの未来を守るものです。
The words I was saying were inciting him to commit a crime, but if we didn't carry out our plan, our life on the run would be filled with more hardships. This was a path I couldn't avoid if I wanted to prove that I was innocent, that I wasn't a murderer.
そうか。そうだったな。私もいい加減覚悟を決めるとしよう。だが、君は自分の身を一番に考えて行動してくれ。身の危険を感じたら逃げるんだ。いいな。
This time, he was the one who held my hand. He gave it a squeeze as his determined eyes locked with mine. I could tell with one look that he was worried about my safety. Even though he was technically the one with the gravest charges among us, I could no longer see him in that light. How could I? A criminal who truly committed such a crime would never be afraid of hurting me by mistake. That was what I believed. Was my intuition mistaken? I didn't have the answer. Even so, I wanted to put my faith in this man, no matter what. The next morning came. As promised, I walked in front of the Tell monument in the marketplace at 9 in the morning. I looked up and checked the direction of the restaurant. It was too far to make out clearly, but Gibb should be seated at terrace seats with the others. Our plan was solid. Once Carlos took out the straw, I would distract him, and Gibb would look for the opportune moment to shoot. But the issue was that there would be roughly 300 meters between my and Gibb's locations. Was it really possible to snipe at that distance? Obscured by my hair was a mini earpiece that Gibb had purchased in Milan. With it, he would confirm the exact timing. Perhaps he'd already predicted that we'd have to communicate across a far distance one day, just like this. Would I be able to carry out our plan without messing up? Now that everyone's fate was on my shoulders, I felt my heart hammering in my chest. Carlos Leon. Sally's investigation last night told us that it was the authentic name of a freelance writer. That didn't mean we could relax our guards, however. If Hamiel's bluff-calling expertise was right, Carlos wasn't behind Bishop, but there was no guarantee he wasn't in cahoots with that mysterious assailant. We were on our own with no allies in sight. Right now, with the many enemies on our trail, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Just then, footsteps echoed behind me. I turned back to the monument to see Carlos approaching me.
Yo, ジョーちゃん。よく眠れたかい？
いえ、あまり。
おい、あまり喋るな。
I was interrupted by Hamiel's voice in my earpiece. I came back to my senses. Hamiel taught me that any questions by Carlos could pry info out of me, so I had to be vigilant. Collecting myself, I cautiously studied his face.
それより、本当に証拠の品は持ってきてくれたんですか？
はは、もちろんだ。取材の後にきちんと渡してみせるよ。いや、それより、ちゃんと全員揃ってるね。
Carlos checked on the restaurant with a pair of binoculars and waved his hand. All happy-go-lucky. Ash's irate voice rang out from the earpiece. Well, that just means Hamiel really likes her. It's like a little kid.
おい、その双眼鏡はもう使わせるな。
皆さんはあの通り、指示を守りました。カルロスさんもその双眼鏡をしまって、証拠品を見せてください。取材。
それじゃ、この双眼鏡は、ジョーちゃんが持っててくれないか。さすがにポケットには入らないからね。
Carlos turned back to me and handed them over.
わかりました。その双眼鏡は私が預かります。
So that everyone on the other end of the earpiece knew the situation, I deliberately spoke out loud. Hopefully it wasn't too unnatural.
そんなに警戒しないでくれよ。でも俺はこれでもジョーちゃんを心配してるんだぜ。あんな野郎どもと逃亡だなんて大変じゃないか。
Hearing Gibb's voice, I was aware that our mission had begun, and impatience ate away at me. I had to hurry up and make him take the evidence out.
カルロスさん、証拠の品を出してください。
I repeated my demand, and in response, the man sighed and shrugged.
はいはい、わかったよ。こいつを見せりゃいいんだろ
う。Carlos reached into his inner coat pocket and took out the straw stored in a plastic bag. It was the exact straw we'd seen in the photo yesterday.
これでいいかい？
How do we know that's the same straw?
本当に本物のストローですか？
So that it didn't seem forced, I moved to the right as if I was observing the straw from the side. Carlos, however, remained in place. Only I had moved. The situation hadn't changed.
どうだい？写真も見るかい？同じ髪跡があるだろ？
He took out his phone and showed the screen to me. Based on what I could hear, this had only made it even trickier for Gibb to aim at his target. But how am I supposed to do that? If I acted without thinking, he'd be suspicious. Though I was agitated, I spoke slowly.
それより、本当に証拠品ってこれだけなんですか？そのスマホには写真も入ってますよね。
ジュースを飲んでる写真とレベッカのホテル前にいるやつか？これだけじゃ証拠としちゃ不十分だがな。気になるって言うなら取材後に消してやるさ。
スマホも壊す？
さすがにクラウドでバックアップ取ってるんじゃないのか。
あんな古いスマホ、クラウドでバックアップどころか OS のアップデートすらできないって。
確かにやけに古いな。取材用に使い捨てで中古品を買ったのか。
なら、そいつもついでに破壊できるといいな。まあ、データを移してたら意味はないが。
無茶を言うな。ミカ、なんとか奴を左に向けさせてくれ。
Easier said than done. No matter what I did, Carlos simply didn't move like I wanted him to, possibly because he was wary of the others.
それよりカジノで撮ったラミー君の写真はあれも消してくれるって約束しますか？
あの時使ってたスマホだが、カジノ内での写真はダメだって警備員にへし折られたよ。たく、レンタル品だったってのについてないね。
Saying that, Carlos took out a phone that had been completely snapped in two. It was the same phone as the one I remembered from back then. If it was rented, he wouldn't have a backup of the data, right? Actually, if the casino staff had broken it, wanting to avoid an info leak, they should have thoroughly checked that he deleted the data. I breathed a sigh of relief. We were probably safe on that front. Then Carlos smirked out of nowhere.
いや、本当に初々しいね。ところで君はいつヨーロッパに？日本国籍だって報道されてたよね。
答えるな。早く左に向かせろ。
I hung my head so that he couldn't see my expression and desperately racked my brain for ideas. What could I do? How could I act in a way that wouldn't rouse suspicion? What would Hamiel do? I tried shifting positions again, but Carlos didn't budge at all. He might have already realized our scheme. I was completely useless, and that was when I heard Ash's annoyed voice.
面倒だな。とっとと撃てばいいじゃないか。
ダメだ。
Gibbs' voice sounded more strained than usual. His exhales came out shaky.
カルロスごと撃てばいい。ここからなら運が良ければ指が吹っ飛ぶ程度じゃないのか。
それはダメです。
Not wanting them to harm Carlos, I spoke without thinking. The man in front of me furrowed his brows.
そんなに日本での話がしたくないのか？一体どんな目にあってこんな海外まで来たのか。そのあたりを話してくれないかね。
Carlos seemed to have taken my outburst as a reply to his earlier question. My agitation, however, hadn't disappeared. At this rate, Carlos might be shot. I wanted to avoid injuring someone at all costs. I would rather have died than have a hand in inflicting bodily harm.
旦那、これ以上時間はかけられない。悪いがあの男ごと撃ってくれ。
Hamiel always has like the worst advice.
無理だ。
なんでだよ。
ここからではミカに当たる。
His voice barely squeezed out of his throat with anguish. I could tell Gibb didn't want to hurt me at all costs. He was a man who'd been arrested under charges of firearms possession and murder. Now he was peering into the scope and praying he didn't hurt me. When I imagined the muzzle of a gun pointing at me, I couldn't stop the onslaught of fear, as if the pit of my stomach was dropping through the ground. But the man holding the gun was much more frightened than I was. Everything was all right. I knew that for a fact. He was a former police sniper, renowned for never missing his mark. I should put my faith in him. I shut my eyes and took a deep breath. I found my resolve. There was only one thing I could do in this situation.
私を信じてください。
I could hear Hitch and Gibbs breathing at my call. After getting that response, I took action at once.
それよりジョーちゃんたちがあのハイウェイからどうやって逃げてきたのかも取材させてもらいたいんだが。
カルロスさん。
ん？なんだいジョーちゃん。
ごめんなさい。
Carlos happened to be already taking out a voice recorder. It was a perfect opening. I snatched a plastic bag with a straw from his hand. I held up the bottom end of the straw so that the mouth end was facing up and raised it high into the air while looking where Gibb should have been.
ジブさん、撃って！
At the same time my voice rang out, I felt a soft shock in my hand. A beat later, a gunshot resounded from the distance. Oh, jeez. The sound of violent ripping, the impact I felt in my hand. I squeezed my eyes shut. It wasn't painful. Timidly, I opened my eyes and looked at my hand. The straw was no longer anywhere in sight. Gibb had flawlessly destroyed such a tiny target by sniping it from a massive distance.
おいおい、マジかよ。どんな芸当だよこりゃ。全然見えなかったが、 今のって銃弾でストローが木っ端みじんにされたってことだよな。
Looking astonished, Carlos stroked his chin and checked the surroundings for fragments. He had no luck. There was nothing that looked remotely like a straw in the vicinity. It had been utterly pulverized.
証拠品が消滅しちまうとは。カジノの時に続けて、俺はジャーナリストとしての運がないみたいだな。ま、こうなっちゃ仕方ない。証拠品がなきゃ写真があっても意味ないしな。こいつも消しといてやるよ。
Carlos proceeded to delete the photos of Ram, Hamil, and Kamu from his phone. He turned his back to me.
じゃあな、ジョーちゃん。また会ったら頼むぜ。
While I gaped at him in shock, Carlos gave up easily and left, just like that. Well, I mean, I'm sure he's afraid of getting shot. I was sure that he complained at the very least. Or I thought he'd be pushier about the interview and come up with some sort of counterattack. I had braced myself to stay silent and look for an opening to escape in that scenario, so I was taken aback by this outcome. Above all, someone had suddenly shot a bullet just inches from where we'd been standing. Wasn't he scared at all? Carlos left with a whimsical gait. I could see a trace of disappointment in his back. In fact, there wasn't even a vague sense of satisfaction. I had this quiet hum of doubt that he had predicted things would turn out this way. Oh, sorry. I had a quiet hum of doubt. Had he predicted things would turn out this way? Just what cogs were turning in this man's head? Had it been a trap, or had we managed to outmaneuver him? Unanswered questions tangled in my mind. Until I met up with the others, all I could do was keep my gaze fixed on Carlos's retreating back. After Carlos disappeared from my vision, I saw everyone rushing up to me, taking his place.
お姉ちゃん、大丈夫？
ミカ、怪我はないか？
The rifle had already been stored in the instrument case. Gib ran over to me, put the case on the ground, and took my hand into his.
列車にはなってはいないようだな。痛みはないか？
はい、なんともありません。
ミカ、なんでそんな危ないことするんだよ。カジノの時といい、無謀すぎるよ。
そうですよ。手で持ったまま狙わせるなんて危なすぎますよ。せめてこう、空高く投げるとかですね。
確かに無謀だ。命知らずと言ってもいい。殺されていいとでも思ってたのか？
そんなことありません。でも、ジブさんならきっと、やりきってくれると信じてましたから。
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that, that idea that she would, lose control of herself is not built into this character. Normally, I would expect that. But I guess maybe the writers knew that that would just hamper the story. Gib looked at me, torn. Eventually, he sighed and shook his head.
今回はうまくできたが、もうこんな真似はやめてくれ。もうに
Profound regret stirred in Gib's eyes. His fingertips were twitching. I was the one who'd made him pull the trigger, and that thought made remorse well up in me.
ごめんなさい。
いや、私こそ君にそこまでさせてすまなかった。
ま、今回ばかりはお手柄だったけどな。
そもそも私が問題なく撃てればよかったのだが、あの男、明らかに狙撃を警戒していた。その割に、証拠品がなくなったらあっさり引き下がったが。
Yeah, thankfully, making points with Hamiel isn't pivotal to the true ending. So, certainly on the first playthrough, we don't have to be nice to him.
撃たせるのが目的だったとかでしょうか。証拠写真を撮りたかったとか。
一応それは警戒していたから目撃はされていないはずだ。一体何が目的だったのか。
As he mulled over the question, Gib retrieved the bullet lodged in the pedestal of the Tell monument. Hamiel also did a scrupulous check over the surroundings for any proof we'd left behind.
ま、 考察は後にして、とっとと行くぞ。あの距離じゃ誰も銃声とは気づかないだろうが、顔を見られるのは得策じゃない。
なあ、そういえば例の逃亡犯がこの町にいるって噂、本当かな？バールにいたやつがそれっぽいのを見たっての？
どうだろうな。俺が逃亡犯ならもっと大きな町へ行くと思うけど。
The idle chatter of the residents reached my ears. Some rumors about us were starting to spread. I didn't know whether the rumors were to blame, but a police car was parked near the marketplace, observing the area.
ただのパトロールだろうが、見られたらまずい。行くぞ。
ああ、ちょっとぐらい観光したかったんだけどな。
サリーも二度寝したかった。
逃亡中だ。仕方ないだろう。
それよか。次はどこに行く？あの男はチューリッヒ方面の宿に泊まってたんだろ？このまま進んで鉢合わせはごめんだぜ。
確かにそうですね。悲劇のヒーローとして描いてもらえるなら素晴らしいですが、あまり遭遇したい相手ではないですし。
なら、ベルン方面へ行けばいい。
僕はどこでもいいよ。少しは休めそうならね。
そうだな。チューリッヒ方面は避けて、ベルン方向へ向かうとしよう。取引を保護にした以上、我々の情報を警察に垂れ込まないとも限らないしな。
そうだな。ミラノからアルトドルフへ移動した情報が警察に伝わったら、まずは直線上にあるチューリッヒに捜査の目が向くだろうしな。
はーい。はあ、チューリッヒ行ってみたかったな。
There was a hint of fatigue in everyone's faces as we walked towards where our vehicles were parked. Subconsciously trying to avoid the public gaze, all of us spontaneously took separate routes. Altdorf was a beautiful town, but even here my stay had ended in the blink of an eye. When would I get a chance to live at my own pace, or had I already run out of such leisurely days in my life? Apprehension about our future was palpable around everyone as we left Altdorf behind us, trying to be as invisible as possible. Chapter 5, Complicity. The evening we departed from Altdorf. We'd been bound for Bern, but we ended up stopping prematurely at a town called Thun to find a place for the night. It was only a 3-hour drive from Altdorf to Bern, but because Sally declared she'd absolutely had to have fun at a lake on the way, we didn't make it. Switzerland, Thun, July 19th, 2028, 21:29, Wednesday, hostel.
うわー、疲れた
ー。それはあれだけ湖で遊べば疲れますよ。
まったく、逃亡中だってのに、お子様はのんきだよね。
そういうラミー君だって、ずぶ濡れになって大はしゃぎだったでしょ？
いや、あれはアッシュの兄貴がふざけて突き落としたんだって。
邪魔だからどかしただけだ。
ふざけるよりひどいじゃん。
お前たち、キャンプに来てるんじゃないんだ。あまり騒いで目立つな。
いや、キャンプの方がもっとマシなとこ泊まるんじゃね？
Since our fleeting funds weren't ample, we picked the cheapest place in town, a hostel. And, well...
やれやれ。ずいぶんと立派な宿だね。
Since we prioritized our budget in keeping a low profile, we sacrificed comfort. Everyone sunk as they saw the bunk beds that crammed the room.
うわ、このベッド、スプリング死んでんじゃん。
ベッドとベッドの幅も狭いですし、なかなかですが、いかにも秘密基地といった感じでワクワクしますね。
せめて女子部屋が分かれてたらよかったんだけどな。
屋根があるだけ十分贅沢な話だ。
No arguing that. We had a roof, and because we were a big group, we got an entire room to ourselves, even though they'd normally be shared among strangers. There was a lock on the door to boot, so I couldn't complain, although I did feel a tad shocked that there was no secluded spot to change clothes. Inside the cramped room, each of us found places to sit down and quietly eat our modest dinner. The menu for tonight was fresh bread and cheese. Ooh, wonderful. Can't wait fast, though. Since there wasn't much to begin with, everyone finished their food in the blink of an eye. The others who polished their plates ahead of me took turns to head to the shared shower room of the hostel to refresh themselves. They're all so fast. I was still eating, but Ash had eaten, showered in minutes, and came back ready to sleep. He kicked off his shoes and climbed onto one of the top bunk beds.
もう寝る。騒ぐなよ。
しないよ。サリーだってもう眠いもん。
ならいいけどな。
Hame was quickly drying his hair as he sprawled on a bottom bunk bed. Yeah, it was a little surprising that even when they weren't hurried, the men were able to eat and shower in mere minutes. I finished my food at my own pace and hurried to the shower room. After washing my grime, feeling fresh again, I returned to the room to find everyone else had already fallen asleep in their bunks. They seemed tough on the surface, but even they were worn down from our relentless situation. I wasn't an exception. I was ready to pass out. I should go to bed too. Taking care not to wake the others, I searched for a bed. I chose the vacant bed above Sally. I scaled the ladder and lay down. Fatigue pressed down on me like an iron weight. This morning had been eventful, but we'd spent the remainder of the day on the road. It had been a peaceful drive without police scares or other crises? I don't know. And I was the sidecar passenger the whole day, so I didn't have it as bad as the drivers, but I could feel weariness clinging to the depths of my mind. This life was wearing me down bit by bit. I couldn't sleep. I turned to my bed and spotted Ash, who'd slept on the top bunk next to mine. On the first night, just passing through the living room where the men had slept was daunting, but now I wasn't scared to sleep beside them. They'd scorn me at times, but I already learned that these people weren't the type to harm others indiscriminately. Even after we were uncuffed, we stuck together. No longer did anyone propose that we go separate ways. But there was a question no one ever broached. What should we do from now on? We might discuss our next town, our next move, but I sensed that we were avoiding talking about the future further down. Sleep wouldn't come to me. I turned again. This time, I saw Rama across from me. When awake, his expressive face changed constantly. Now he slept totally still, as if holding his breath. His brows were furrowed with distress. He grasped the bedsheets. He didn't seem to be having a sweet dream. They all seemed composed when awake, but deep within, maybe they too were tormented by their guilt and anxiety over our current lives. Of course, Camus Otaku man. Or Otaku man.
おい、寝言言ってるの誰だ？
キャビアはパフェには合わないよ。
A select few were still in the same in their dreams, but that relieved me too. Maybe I wouldn't lose myself despite having lost my former life. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the breaths of other people. I wasn't alone here. On that thought, sleep finally took me away. Man, I find it easy to sleep anywhere. I've slept on the floor in many situations many times. I've slept standing up a couple times too. A boisterous argument woke me the next morning.
ハミー君のバカ！サリー気持ちよく寝てたのに！
俺は何も悪くないだろう。ベッドから足を下ろしただけだ。床で寝てるお前が悪い。
床で寝てたんじゃないの！ベッドから落ちたの！それなのに踏んづけるなんて、ハミー君全然紳士的じゃない！
Oh, Sally fell onto the ground. The beds were pretty narrow, so I couldn't blame her. Nervously, I looked down. Sally was puffing her cheeks out to the fullest to show her displeasure.
ハミー君ってほんとデリカシーないよね。紳士ならレディーを優しくベッドに戻すもんでしょ。
俺が紳士に見えるか？な、あんたも俺にそいつは期待しちゃいないだろ。
He noticed I was awake. He looked up to meet my eyes as I peeped at the commotion.
まあ。
brutally honest. Suddenly dragged into the fray, I hurriedly fixed my bed hair as I climbed down from the bunk bed.
それよりサリー、大丈夫？ベッドから落ちたって言ってたけど。
I have also fallen from my bed multiple times. Well, maybe two, but that's still multiple.
そうなの。気がついたら床で寝てて、サリーもびっくりだよ。通りで硬いと思ったんだよね。
このベッドもまっとうな寝心地とは言えなかったけどな。
ですが、冗談で寝ていなくてよかったですね。
No kidding. With everyone bustling from the moment they rose, I got ready for the day too. After washing my face in the communal washroom, I returned to see that Rom, who'd managed to sleep through Sally's griping, was now awake too.
ああ、よく寝た。もう昼じゃん。腹減ったし、何か食いに行こうぜ。
Rom's always hungry, man. Wait, seriously. Wait, it's noon? I whipped out my phone to check the time. My jaw dropped. It was just past 12. Even considering how tired I'd been, I'd slept a really long time.
チェックアウトの時間は大丈夫なんですか？
とっくに過ぎている。誰も起きる気配がなかったから、とりあえずもう一泊分は手続きしておいた。人目につかず潜伏できるなら、この町でも構わないからな。
Gib reported with a sigh.
おお、さすがはジブシです。それでは何か食べに行きましょうか。チーズフォンデュとか気になっているんですが。
いや、報道されていないとはいえ、アルトドルフで目撃されたかもしれないからな。宿を全員で出るのは避けた方がいい。
じゃあピザのデリバリーにしようよ。
いや、配達員に顔を見られる方がまずくないか？
そうだな。届けた後に気がついて通報でもされたらたまったものではない。他人にこの場所を知られるような行動は避けよ
う。では買い出しですか？
問題は誰が行くかだな。できればスイスの店に詳しいものにしたいところだが。
Gib turned to Ash, still lounging on his top bunk, but Ash didn't so much as glance in our direction. Seeing that, Hamil shrugged.
俺もパシリはごめんだね。
では私が行ってきます。
I know, let's pick the person that would most stand out, the Japanese person in Switzerland. I held on to everyone's living expenses anyway, so I was the most appropriate choice. I volunteered myself, but Gib looked conflicted.
大丈夫か？君はまだ疲れた顔をしているが。
That much was true. I'd slept until noon, but my body had barely recovered from all I'd put it through. Part of it was the quality of the bed, but the main reason was because my burnout had become extreme. But if I showed it, I was worried that Hamil would say to leave me behind, so I shook my head.
いえ、大丈夫です。
しかし。
では僕が行きましょう。今日は実はずっと楽しみにしていたジャパンコミックの翻訳版の発売日でして。
いや、頼むから荷物は増やさないでくれ。
じゃあサリーが行く。マカロンとポップコーンと。
それが飯だって？却下だ。本人も言ってるし、やっぱりうちの財布係が一番じゃないか？余計なもんは買わないだろうし、目立つ見た目でもない。
He doesn't stand out. Switzerland is almost homogeneous. Well, it depends on the town. I wouldn't say it's totally homogeneous, but certainly where they are, I doubt there's like a large mix of people.
そうだが。だが一人では危ない。私も一緒に。
じゃあ僕が一緒に行くよ。
ラミーがか？
だってジブじゃ目立っちゃうよ。その分僕なら同い年くらいだし、うまくいけば地元カップルぐらいには見えるんじゃね？
言われてみればそうだな。では悪いが、二人に頼めるか？
はい、行ってきますね。
じゃあ早速行こう。
Rom skipped out of the room. There wasn't a lick of tiredness in his form. As usual, the others had impressive stamina. I did my best to trail after him. Switzerland, Thun, July 20th, 2028, 12:31 p.m., Thursday, the plaza. Strange enough, all the plazas in Switzerland look very much the same. When we walked into the streets, the mouth-watering aroma of cooking food engulfed us. It was lunchtime.
腹減った。何買ってく？ハンバーガー？
ハンバーガーは最近食べたし、ドミトリーにキッチンがあったから何か簡単に作ろうかな。
マジ？ご飯作ってくれんの？
うん。外食だとお金がすぐなくなっちゃいそうだし、あったかいものを食べると落ち着くから。
Plus, the act of cooking helped calm me down, even if it was something simple. Doing it let me believe that I was still living out my ordinary life. Oh, make a good point, Topaz. But what should I make? Each one of us were from different nations with different cuisines. What kind of food would everyone unanimously take a liking to? Tacos? Well, maybe not. At least Hamiel doesn't seem to like Japanese food, so when we turned down a side street, the iconic symbol of the city, Thun Castle, entered my line of sight.
Oh, 綺麗.
I would imagine it may be hard to get taco seasoning in Switzerland.
ん？おー、ほんとだ。
Peeking out above the buildings surrounding the plaza was a castle with white walls and a crimson roof. Showered by the summering sunlight, Thun Castle was enchanting like a castle from a fairy tale. Other tourists also stopped in their tracks, captivated by the scenery.
わあ、見て見て。ここからトゥーン城が見える。もうちょっと近くに行かない？
じゃあ、あっちの方でレストラン探すか。トゥーン城に近いホテルが取れればよかったんだけど、なかなかなくてさ。
あ、でも予約の時調べたけど、トゥーン城の真ん前に来年新しいホテル建つんだって。再開発ってやつなのかな？
マジ？じゃあ、また来年も来るか。
Yeah, no, she's got a ton of weight on her shoulders, for sure.
やった！来年はトゥーンの他にも行きたいとかあるんだ。ガイドブックにあったんだけど。
Next year. For an instant, I imagined what I could be doing next year, but I hurriedly drove the thought away. Right now, all I needed to think about was our dinner. I couldn't afford to think so far into the future, so watching the tourists innocently enjoying their trip felt like a movie scene to me. I turned away from them and walked by Rom's side.
ラミー君は何が食べたい？
ミカが作る料理なら何でも嬉しいよ。だってこの間のもすげえ美味しかったもん。
本当？口に合ってよかった。
Rom was smiling from ear to ear. I felt my spirits lift a little. At the supermarket, I focused on ingredients that I could use for dishes that everyone could eat. Since I had to cook for 7, the food we'd bought just for today turned out to be a gigantic pile.
そっち重くない？大丈夫？
うん。ラミー君はたくさん持ってくれたから。ラミー君こそ重たくない？
平気平気。こんぐらい余裕だって。
We split the bags between us and headed back to the hostel. I hope we can take things easy in this town. Oh my, that means nothing's going to go easy. I didn't see many police officers, and there were relatively numerous tourists. We'd spent the last 24 hours without any issues. Hoping that this time we wouldn't be discovered and could lurk in one place for a while, I walked on. And then... Angel wing tattoo on my arm? Yes. It's actually, I have an angel wing on one arm and a devil wing on the other. In fact, I need to put the actual angel and devil on the shoulders, but that's for a later date. Started with wings first. I bumped into someone who'd rushed out from my corner and almost dropped our groceries.
ごめんね。大丈夫？
うん。こっちこそごめんよ。
Yeah, it's to remind me that, you know, I can be just as fucked up as I can be friendly. So, sort of keep myself in check, right? It was a boy with ginger hair. I watched him run off cheerfully. That was when Rom squinted at me.
ミカ、財布はある？
もちろんここに。って、ない！
I made sure I had it on me when I left the supermarket, yet the wallet that should have been in my pocket had suddenly vanished.
どうしよう、ラミー君。
Our communal living expenses were in that wallet. Color drained from my face, but then Rom gently patted me on the head.
そんな気したんだよな。じゃあ、ちょっと待ってて。取り返してくるから。
I know, of course Mika would get... she would get done in by a kid. That's just her. Rom set his bags down and ran off. I mean, she did get done in by Rom, too, when we first started the story. Soon, Rom caught up and grabbed the boy with the ginger hair by the scruff of his neck.
こーら。
うわっ！
Picked up by Rom like a kitten, the boy flailed and struggled.
なんだよ！
うちの財布、取っただろ。狙うならもっと余裕ありそうなとこにしとけよ。
俺が盗んだなんて証拠ないだろ。
でもこれ、君のポケットに入ってたんだけど。
Saying that, Rom held out his hand like a magician, presenting none other than my wallet. Huh?
嘘だろ。ちゃんとポケット入れたのに。
ほら見ろ。やっぱ吸ったんじゃないか。
あ。
The boy covered his mouth with both hands. Rom released him and returned to my side.
はい。取り返したからもう大丈夫。
ありがとう。
I took the wallet from him and made doubly sure to put it away in the most secure fashion I could. As for the boy, he just stood there, dumbfounded.
すげえ。なんだよ今の。神業じゃん。全然気がつかなかったし。
His eyes were filled with admiration, as if he were looking at a hero. Seeing the boy's face light up like the sun, Rom grinned, looking a little proud.
ま、今回は相手が悪かったね。ほら、もう帰ろう。お腹減ったよ。
Under Rom's ushering, I began walking, but I couldn't hide how shaken I was that such a young boy had nearly stolen all of our money. I thought I'd been prudent, but he got the better of me. If Rom weren't around, I would have ruined us. Mostly I couldn't get over the culprit's age.
あんな小さな子がスリだったなんて。
え？そんな驚くこと？別に普通だろ。ガキだって生きてくのに必死なんだからさ。
I know he's right, but still. Some children had to commit crimes to survive. I'd known that, in theory. But knowing something from books and experiencing it firsthand was completely different. Judging by the townscape, didn't seem to be a prosperous town, yet there were young children who had to steal to survive. It was surreal. In a daze, I headed back to the hostel with Rom. However, we had a little mouse following us.
いなくなんないね。
うん。どうしよう、ラミー君。このままじゃ、止まってる場所がバレちゃうよね。
だな。とにかく、あっちの方行ってみよっか。
うん。
We made a turn to distance ourselves from the hostel and kept walking as fast as we could. But no matter how far we walked, the boy remained stubbornly behind us. Wherever we turned around, he was there without fail, at a slight distance. Just like before, he looked at Rom with admiration. Judging by that, he wasn't chasing us because he'd realized we were fugitives. Maybe he wanted to say something. We couldn't let him follow us forever, so I stopped and called out to him.
どうしたの？
えっと。
The boy glanced at Rom and hung his head shyly.
なんだよ。なんかあるのか？
Rom joined me, looking down at the boy with a raised brow. The boy mumbled incoherently for a moment before whipping his head up.
なあ兄ちゃん。俺をスリの弟子にしてくれないか。
え？
は？弟子？
ああ、俺スリが上手くならなきゃいけないんだ。頼むよ、師匠。
師匠って、ちょっと待ってよ。どういうこと？
それより、スリが上手くならなきゃいけないってどういうこと？お父さんやお母さんは？
いないよ。俺、孤児院にいるもん。
Oh. Orphanage. I froze at the unexpected word. At the same time, I heard Rom suck in a sharp breath. Rom left the groceries to one side and crouched down in front of the boy.
もしかして孤児院が赤字か何かなのか。
それもあるけど、それよりお金を集めて手に入れなきゃならないものがあるんだよ。
手に入れなきゃならないもの？
うん。俺たちが暮らしてる孤児院の権利書がやばいやつに買われちゃったって言うんだよ。
Oh, another mini caper.
やばいやつって？
トゥーンでも有名な金持ちだよ。あいつ十分金を持ってるってのにまだ金儲けしようとしてるんだ。
According to the boy, an infamous businessman had purchased a plot of land where the orphanage was built. Apparently, that man's business had to do with the tourism industry in Thun, and he kicked off a hotel project in the old town area near Thun Castle. The scope of his project included the land of the orphanage, and so the businessman offered to purchase the land, and the director agreed.
それで、どうしてその人がやばい人なの？
だって、やばいやつだろ。トゥーンで一番の資産家なんだぜ。そんな金持ちなのに、まだ儲けようとするだなんて。
状況を記録するのか？
これでいいかな？
Okay, I've been talking for an hour, so I will take a break,
これでいい
and
か？
we'll stop it there for
一度
this
体勢
session.
を立て直す
This is meowmurai. You've been watching Despera
Despera
Drops
Drops.
running on Nintendo Switch 2. Yeah, boy, I really love this VN. I'm really glad we decided to read it. You never know what you get, especially with VNs that are not really well talked about. So yeah, super happy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.